For the past few weeks, I've been replaying the 2D Metroid games in chronological order to prepare for Metroid Dread. Naturally, I began with Metroid 1 and 2. The remakes, of course, because I'm not a masochist. Both of these are great, but the one I was most eager to play again was Metroid 3, also known as Super Metroid. While the first two Metroid games are influential in their own right, Super Metroid gave the series an identity, one that separates itself from Nintendo's other, more kid-friendly IPs. Released in 1994 for the Super NES, Super Metroid was made in collaboration with Nintendo R&D 1 and Intelligent Systems, being directed by Yoshio Sakamoto, who served as a character designer for the first game. The late and great Gunpei Yokoi was manager of the team, and Metroid 1's Makoto Kano was a producer. Together, they set out to give bounty hunter Samus Aran a triumphant return on a home console, with visceral action, open-ended exploration, and an unsettling atmosphere, the last of which is felt from before the title screen. Immediately after seeing the Nintendo logo, the mangled bodies of scientists appear. Yeah, this isn't Super Mario World. This title intro sets the stage for the tone of Super Metroid, and it does not change once you hit that start button.
The last Metroid is in captivity. The galaxy is at peace.
After a recap of Metroid 1 and 2, the game begins with Samus answering a distress signal from a research station housing the last Metroid. Whereas most 16-bit action games would open with an action-packed level filled with enemies, Super Metroid opens with eerie silence. Only the sounds of Samus's footsteps and the station's mechanisms fill the void. What a haunting way to begin a game. And it gets even worse when she enters a room filled with corpses. Human corpses. Nintendo. Fun for the whole family. Luckily, the baby Metroid is in the next room, just sitting there in the dark with no one guarding it. If that's the case, then who attacked the station? Oh my god! After Samus fights Ridley for a few seconds, he escapes. Something Samus will have to do since the station is rigged to blow. While this opening segment can be completed in less than 2 minutes, it is nothing short of iconic. It's creepy, tense, and simply unexpected for a wholesome company like Nintendo. What I wouldn't give to be a child in 1994 experiencing Super Metroid for the first time. And thankfully after the opening, it's all uphill from here. Samus escapes the station and lands on planet Zebes, where Ridley and the space pirates are stationed. When her ship docks, the game tells the player nothing. Not where to go, not what to do, nothing. Of course, this is similar to the first two Metroid games, but you'd think the developers would want to hold new players' hands a bit, right? Well, they do and they don't in Super Metroid, as this is the first game in the series to have a map, but that's pretty much all the help you'll get as a player. There are 2 ways to go after landing on Zebes, left and right. Going right will lead to a wall, so left is the only option until another wall presents itself. So the only way from here is down, which will lead to the Morph Ball and the Morph Ball bombs to blow the wall to bits. It's typical Metroidvania gameplay, but back in 1994, this style of play was not very common outside of the previous entries in the series. In fact, Super Metroid takes place on the same planet as Metroid 1, and the Morph Ball is in the same spot too. Ridley, Kraid, and Mother Brain even reappear as bosses. Not to say Super Metroid is a remake of 1, that would come 10 years later, but it's clear the developers wanted to create an experience that they couldn't have made on the NES. And they did just that. The 16-bit graphics are gorgeous, the enemies are more diverse than they've ever been, and the bosses take up most of the screen, sometimes more. However, Super Metroid's greatest strength lies in its eerie atmosphere, building on what its predecessors started. Or tried to anyway. Both Metroids on NES and Game Boy had some dark environments and unsettling music to go with them. Visually, they were dark games, but they still had the essence of kid-friendly 2D platformers. They were colorful, at least the first game was, the enemies didn't look very scary, and the music was upbeat. All of which are things that Super Metroid isn't. Sure, there are moments where the signature Nintendo innocence comes out, like with the somewhat goofy Decoras and Edakuns, but Super Metroid otherwise feels like a surprisingly mature experience, which is made clear from the very start when Samus first explores Zebes. Everything is dark. the music is subtle, and the creatures she encounters try to kill her. It's not a very welcoming environment, and it fills the player with a sense of dread. It isn't until a bit later that the tone starts to lighten slightly, with more upbeat music and brighter, colorful areas, before returning to the creepiness with the spore-spawned boss fight, which has no right to be as spooky as it is. You'd think it would have music like... But no. Instead, this is the song that plays. I cannot stress enough just how cool, unique, and creative Super Metroid's soundtrack is. Composed by Kenji Yamamoto and Minako Hamano, most of the game's tracks are ominous, with only a few I'd consider upbeat, namely the Brinstar theme and boss themes. The music is haunting, and it makes the player feel uneasy as if there is a looming threat watching your every move. This feeling is most present in the wrecked ship, where Phantoon is literally watching Samus's every move as she explores the vessel. The music is what makes Super Metroid's atmosphere wholly unique, and if you replaced it with something more buoyant or intense, it would completely change everything. For example, while Metroid Zero Mission is great, it doesn't quite have the same atmosphere as Super Metroid, and that's partially due to a faster-paced, more action focus, and high-octane music that blasts throughout the majority of the game. In Super Metroid, though Samus can sprint, she moves more delicately, as if gravity barely affects her when jumping. Because of this, she has great control over her aerial movements, which come in handy when wall jumping. This move is not as simple to pull off as it is in later 2D Metroids, since it requires perfect timing, but I discovered during this playthrough that it's way easier on a D-pad and not a control stick. If you're playing this game through Virtual Console or Switch Online, definitely use the D-pad. It's also not a move that's obviously explained through text. When I say that Super Metroid doesn't tell the player anything, I mean it doesn't tell the player anything. It doesn't even mention that holding the B button enables sprinting. I remember that frustrating me the first time I played. Basically, the game expects that you'll naturally learn how to play by putting obstacles in your direction, forcing you to explore in search of the solution. However, there are two instances where the answers are not as obvious, and that's where those friendly creatures I mentioned earlier come in. An ostrich-like being called a Decora demonstrates how to use shine sparking to jump out of a pit, and little fuzzy guys called Edacoons show off their wall jumping skills. Like I said, use the D-pad. You'd later be able to thank these creatures for their help by saving them before Zebes blows up, which you should do if you want Metroid Fusion to make sense. Unfortunately, later Metroid games would place tutorial texts on screen, but there were some skills you could learn on your own, like how to pull off a sweet double bomb jump with your morph ball. In spite of Super Metroid's dark and eerie atmosphere, it's still a bona fide action game. You'll spend just as much time shooting enemies as you will exploring, and there's a great variety of dangerous fauna and flora. Yes, even the plants try to kill Samus. The enemies don't take much strategy to kill, though some are only vulnerable to certain weapon types. The space pirates are the big outliers, as they can only be killed with charge beams or missiles, save for the earlier ones that are so weak a paper cut could kill them. Like most Metroid games that aren't called Other M, you kill creatures not just because you're on a genocidal mission, but also because they're either in your way, or you just need to stock up on ammo and health. This is why I'm grateful for the farming spots where enemies infinitely respawn and drop items when destroyed. I mean, what else are Metroid enemies for? The exploration is undoubtedly the star of the game, and it really puts the Metroid in Metroidvania. Metroid games have open-ended world structures, requiring Samus to find new tools that let her progressively unlock more of the world. It's a lot like The Legend of Zelda, but set on a 2D linear plane. Super Metroid took this formula established in the first game and perfected it. The map was a nice and necessary addition to avoid being perpetually lost, but you technically could play without it thanks to the stronger visual design, with each area being distinct in both looks and level layout. As usual, Samus will explore the planet, finding upgrades that will help her get through certain areas, but what's interesting about Super Metroid is that there are upgrades you can completely miss. Tools like the X-ray visor are optional and only used for some puzzles, and sure, there are other items in Metroid games that could be considered optional, but Super Metroid places some of them in rooms you might miss entirely. And that's not even to mention sequence breaking, where you can get items sooner than the game intends you to if you know the right tricks. I'm telling you guys, wall jumping really helps. Sometimes developers keep sequence breaking in mind while developing their games, and Nintendo confirmed that Metroid Dread will give players the ability to acquire certain items earlier than intended. God, October 8th can't get here soon enough! It's really cool to see Nintendo embrace this side of Metroid instead of trying to suppress it like they did with the Wii version of Metroid Prime that fixed a certain sequence break. It makes me wonder how they're going to pull it off in Dread. Regardless, Super Metroid is still a fun time if played by the books. There is a lot to see in the depths of Planet Zebes, and collecting each upgrade to make Samus the ultimate warrior couldn't be more satisfying. Actually, I take that back, because solving a puzzle after getting lost for a while is quite the relief. Truthfully, the entire map is a puzzle, and figuring out where to go can have some unlikely solutions. I don't envy those who played Super Metroid before internet guides existed, because there are a few solutions that are less than obvious, but finding them will make you feel like a genius. Namely, having to powerbomb the underwater tunnel in Meridia. I remember getting lost in this area only to find out that this tunnel I've been crossing was not only destructible, but leads into a new area of the map. It goes to show just how well Super Metroid uses the environment to create clever puzzles. The developers knew this would cause players to think that every room had something hidden, and they wouldn't be entirely wrong. Just powerbombing every single room is bound to reveal a new item, but you wouldn't earn any speedrunning points, that's for sure. This is one thing the 2D Metroids have over the 3D ones, in that it's easier to hide secrets right in front of the player's face. Something that's much harder to pull off in 3D without placing an obvious crack in the wall or hole in the ground. This is also something I haven't seen done very well in other Metroidvanias, as newer ones in particular feel the need to give more hints on hidden pathways in the game. Even the more recent 2D Metroids have the pulse radar that reveal these secrets, but thankfully, it's completely optional. Planet Zebes is also one of the best designed Metroidvania maps of all time. It's not like Metroid Fusion where each area is linked by a main hub. Here, there's a certain flow to how each area is connected, providing an intended path for the player to take. It's not like you complete one area and move on to the next. Instead, you'll be visiting and revisiting areas after acquiring certain gear. It's not a linear path, more like an intentional zigzag pattern. Metroid Prime would adopt a similar method of revisiting areas instead of completing one area at a time like in Prime 2 and 3. And unlike those games, including Fusion and Zero Mission, Super Metroid does not give waypoint markers, so the path feels even less linear than it already is. Or isn't, as the case may be. It's tougher to navigate, but it never feels unfair thanks to the map and the well-placed upgrades. If you get a new tool, chances are there's a door or pathway nearby that can be unlocked with it. It helps to take note of pathways you can't access yet, because you might be able to get through them sooner than later. Samus's goal on Zebes is to defeat a certain number of bosses in order to enter the space pirate base. And Super Metroid has some of the most iconic battles that aren't named Quadraxis. There are the big three from the first game, Kraid, Ridley, and Mother Brain. This trio is realized much better on the Super NES than the original NES because the limited power of the 8-bit machine had to crunch them down to sizes that were less than intimidating. In Super Metroid, they're bigger, more ferocious, and look absolutely terrifying. There are also a few new bosses like Crocomire, Phantoon, and Dragon. Sure, there are some mini-bosses in between, but these are the big foes that Samus is required to defeat before entering the final area, as indicated by the statue at the entrance. And I just now realized that Crocomire isn't on this statue. Blasphemy! I'm sorry, buddy, you deserved better. Some of these bosses are extremely easy, like Kraid, but his battle becomes a cakewalk after the third or fourth time playing Super Metroid anyway. What's great about this battle though is the build-up. Right before entering his lair, Samus encounters a mini Kraid, which was about the size of him in the original NES game. Naturally, after defeating this literal mini-boss, the player might think they've successfully beaten Kraid again until they enter the real boss room and he's massive. It gets even bigger in the middle by breaking through the ceiling and not even fitting the entire screen. It's clever misdirection, even if the boss itself isn't too hard. Same goes for Crocomire, despite how much we love him. All it takes is a few missiles to the mouth. But then we get to the tougher battles, Phantoon, Dragon, and Ridley. For one, Phantoon is just terrifying. He vanishes in and out, causing you to anticipate where he might appear. What's worse is that using a super missile causes him to unleash an undodgeable wave of projectiles. Luckily, all you have to do is charge your beam and jump, thus creating invincibility frames. Suddenly, Phantoon isn't so scary, now is he? Dragon, on the other hand, scares me. Admittedly, I was really bad at this fight. I couldn't dodge his sticky projectiles, and I forgot about using the Morph Ball to avoid his attacks. My only saving grace for this battle was the rewind feature. Then there's Ridley, who can be tricky if you didn't collect enough energy tanks or missiles. If you did though, all you have to do is flood him with missiles and dodge his attacks. Not a super complicated boss battle. Finally, there is Mother Brain, which begins similarly to the battle from Metroid 1. This time, however, I ran out of missiles during the fight, which I needed to cause damage. So I thought, what the heck, and left the battle, refilled my missiles, and continued where it left off. I didn't think that was remotely possible. Well, that's partially because this isn't the real boss fight. After defeating Mother Brain, it turns into Mother Brainosaurus, leading to a battle rigged against Samus. As she's about to be killed, the baby Metroid from the beginning sacrifices itself to save her, but not before absorbing the power of Mother Brain, which falls upon Samus, causing her to become an absolute beast, killing Mother Brain and destroying planet Zebes. Hopefully she didn't forget to save the creatures this time. After revisiting Super Metroid, I still consider it the best 2D Metroid so far. It's possible that Metroid Dread could top it, but Super Metroid will always have an unfair advantage, being the era it came out and practically solidifying the Metroidvania genre, even before the other half of that portmanteau existed. In 1994, there were hardly any games like Super Metroid. At the time, most games about shooting aliens and robots were high-octane action titles with fast-paced music and a colorful art style. Heck, even the games based around horror still felt more like action games. Super Metroid is first and foremost an action-adventure game, but the atmosphere is what made it stand out among the rest. The music was bone-chilling, the setting, while colorful, was filled with dread, and the game barely gave the player any hints as to where to go or what to do. It was truly an isolating experience, and that's actually the best word to describe Super Metroid. Isolating. As a player, you truly feel alone exploring this dangerous world with threats around every corner, and even the game itself is nary telling you what to do, at least with words. It's also uninviting, as if you're not supposed to be there. Alongside Prime, these were the Metroid games that captured the feeling of isolation the best. I don't know if I'd say Super Metroid is better than Prime, because I love Prime way too much, but Super Metroid definitely set the groundwork on what the series would be for the next 2.5 decades. And for that reason, I love it. And no, it doesn't need a remake, so stop saying that. But what do you think? Is Super Metroid your favorite game in the series, or at least favorite 2D Metroid? Let us know in the comments below, and check out the videos on the right for more topics you might be interested in. Until next time, bye, Metroid Dread.